some of the basics of pacing. So the first thing you need to know is how to come prepared for lab, right? So hopefully you already watched, and if you haven't, make sure you watch it, a video about how to prepare your notebook. So we're not going to talk about that, but we will talk about how to be prepared in your outfit. So first of all, make sure you check the weather, and make sure you bring something warm. I'm freezing right now, for example, and I was clearly not prepared, but anyway, don't make the same mistakes I did. Second of all, you need to bring, and this applies for every lab, closed-toe shoes that are comfortable and that are flat. So another example of how I did not do a good job, I'm wearing heels, but and it doesn't need to be special shoes of any kind, just the kind of shoes that you will wear on a regular basis, sneakers. Okay, so if you bring that, make sure you bring water with you at for all labs, and make sure that you, again, bring your notebook. Let's talk about pacing itself. So the purpose of pacing and surveying is to give you preliminary information before you start using your surveying tools, to give you an idea of how large an area is in general. This is not a very precise measurement. This is not something you use to report to a surveying company or the government or anything like that. But this will give you, there's two reasons why you want to pace. One is a lot of times the reason that you're surveying something for your own personal benefit is to find out, for example, if you're going to build a patio and you just want to know how many tiles to buy or how many wood planks. It can give you a good idea of how much area you're working with. But second of all, and this is the most important, I think, for this class, is we're going to be using sophisticated machines that are going to give you a lot of information quickly. You're also going to be using steel tape and various methods. But particularly with machines, sometimes a machine that is not properly calibrated can give you a measurement that if you haven't paced the area already, you can trust blindly when you shouldn't. Okay, so, and it has happened. Maybe you don't, sometimes the problem is we turn the machine on and we turn our brain off and we're like, from here to there, yeah, it's giving me 250 feet. That sounds about right, but not even close, right? So the idea is that you're going to, in the labs that we're going to do in this class, on top of whatever we're learning that day, you're going to pace it before we start to just give you a kind of range of where you should be working with. Okay, so how are we going to pace? So we're just going to walk, but we want you to determine what your average pace is. So the one that you're going to use for calculations from now on, because if you're going to count the number of steps, but what the length between the steps is something that can vary a little bit. So we're going to do it many, many times so you can find a good average up to 2 significant figures. Okay, so here's how the lab's set up. There are pink flags on the field. Here we have a couple. They are separated by 100 feet, 200 feet, and 300 feet. You're going to walk the 100 feet one 3 times. You're going to walk the 200 foot one 3 times, and then you're going to do the 300 foot one 3 times as well. The idea, the main things that you need to take into account is that you are going to try to walk as naturally as possible. And I know you're like, how else would I walk? But as you're walking, you'll feel how you suddenly don't know how to walk. Okay? Just relax. Try to keep the same pace as you walk. Don't rush. Don't go too slow. Walk as you normally walk, because that's how you're going to do it when you're actually pacing a distance. Also, don't stand too close to anyone, because if you're following someone behind, it's very common that you kind of start mimicking their pace, and that's something you don't want. You want your own. So let them be at least halfway through the field before you start going behind them. Make sure you, as soon as you're done with each one of the legs, you're going to write down how many steps you took. So the idea is that because we pre-measured that that's 100 feet, that's 200 feet, that's 300 feet, with the notebooks the way we showed you to set them up, you should be able to, you're going to find averages and then an average of the averages, down to 2 sig figs. So at the end you can say, okay, so my pace is 1.7 feet or something. And from then on, I know it's a terrible number, but the idea is that later we're going to give you an area that you're going to have to measure by walking, and you're going to count the number of steps. Let's say it's a triangle, and I go from here it was 11 steps, from here it was 20, and from here it was 15, and then multiply it times your average pace. Okay, and then we have pre-measured it, so we know what the measurements are, and we're going to, once you do the calculations, we will be able to tell you how close you are, and if you're off by more than 5%, we're going to make you do it again. And if you keep having issues, you're going to
pacing technique. So I'm gonna try to align the flag-ish along my foot. Now remember, this isn't like, oh, well, I'm 3/4 of a foot off. I mean, just center it in general. All right, now when I'm gonna walk, I'm just gonna walk like a normal person. All right, like that. What I'm not gonna do is start and be like, oh my God, everybody's watching me walk, and I'm gonna be like, you know, and this sounds really stupid, but whenever, like Professor Sidwell said, whenever you start walking, you realize how weird walking is, and you're like, wait a second, I've been doing this my whole life, why am I freaking out? You also don't want to be like, you want to be really careful about how I walk, and like she said, you just want to be comfortable, so you want to be wearing the kind of shoes you're going to be wearing out in the field. You don't want to be cold, you don't want to be sore from, like, you know, hitting the gym the night before. You just want to be walking like a normal person. So you're going to start center and just walk directly toward the flag. So I'm going to walk toward the flag, and I'm going to count my steps as I go. 44, because I remembered while I was counting. Now I got lucky because I ended up hitting like right dead center to the flag where I kind of started. Now if for some reason you end up going kind of like this, you can go ahead and say like 44.5, but don't be like, well, that's 44 1/3, or this is 44 2/3. You know, don't worry about that. Remember that the best you can do with estimation is if you have 2 different tick marks, you can about estimate half the distance of a tick mark. So I can say 44.5, but don't get nuts and like 44 3/8 or anything like that. Okay? That's really all there is to this lab, except you're going to do it over and over, and so it's a little bit cold, and I feel like my paces are smaller than they normally are, just because I'm a little cold. But again, that's why it's important you're going to be comfortable. It's going to be fine. Don't freak out, but this is one of those labs where you're going to be like, this is kind of silly, I don't get why we're doing this, but when you get out in the field, you can be like, oh, I finally understand, you know, why this is a really valuable skill. So we're going to do this 3 times this way, 3 times at the 200 and 3 times at the 300, and then do an actual estimation.
So now I'm going to go and look at my actual notebook. So I can put in the day, and today was, I have no idea, we'll just pretend it was this day. Except I should actually write that neatly, because that's kind of the point of this class, right? All right. So it's important that whatever you're writing, that other people can actually read it. So we don't want you to just, like I said, go in there and be like 12, 7, 20, 17. You will lose points for not having things put together. So I'm going to be in crew number 1. So the chief, of course, was Sidwell, because, you know, not going to argue with that. And I help with the measuring, so I'll put myself here. I can't spell my own name, which is impressive. All right. So you use steel tape and chain pins. So the weather was clear. The temperature was 48 degrees because it was cold. The ground cover was grass. Okay. So now for the number of paces, the first time I did it, I got 44. And that's where the 44 would go. Now after that, I'm going to continue to do the pacing, and I'm going to get 44 and 43. So I can do my average right quick. Can't spell. And by spell, I mean do math. All right. Now this is 43.66667. Now it's perfectly fine to leave, whatever you call it, to leave a certain number of sig figs right here. But in the end, we're going to truncate down. So I can say 43.6 or 43.7. And I can use the originals in later calculation. Now, if I'm going to go in and calculate my pace for that 100-foot meter, or that 100-foot pace, I have 100 feet divided by that 43.7. And so if I go 100 feet divided by, I'm going to use that original number. Now I have 2.29. So that's going to be 2.3. You don't want to have more than 2 sig figs on here, just because that's just not a reasonable thing. So I basically am going at 2.3 feet per pace. Now I can go and I can do this for the other 200 feet and the 300 feet, and those numbers are going to be different because when you're walking longer, you tend to adjust your pace accordingly. So I'm going to get numbers here and I'm going to get numbers here. Now for our purposes, let's just go ahead and assume that I've done that. And now for our purposes, let's just assume I've done that. And I'm going to have an average, let's say that turns out that my average pace turned out to be 2.2 feet per pace. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk the perimeter that I've been expected to do. So I'm going to label my perimeter estimation. Now, assuming that it took me 285 steps, so I'm going to say 285 paces, and this is going to be very familiar, seem a whole lot like unit conversions. So I have 2.2 feet per pace, so I'm going to do that. The paces are going to cancel out. I'll be left with feet. So 285 times 2.2, can't spell, 285 times 2.2, and that's 627 feet. Now, I would appreciate, for the purposes of this, that you give me a plus or minus 5%. So remember that if I want to do 5%, just 0.05, or I can do 627 times 1.05 and times 0.95. So I can say, well, the estimate plus or minus 5% is probably going to be between 625 and 658. So I can say plus or minus 5% gives me, that minus looks funny, plus or minus 5% gives me a range of, I already forgot my numbers, 625 and 658. So that's a pretty wide range, actually, but that at least gives me kind of an order of magnitude about how big I would expect this pace to be. Now, if you're not within that plus or minus 5% range, we'll have you go ahead and repace it. Now, the other thing that we're going to have you do over here in this section of the book is to go ahead and draw it out, and there's a much better example in your lab book, but basically that you're going to have Lakeshore and LSD. Lakeshore Drive, and then you got the intramural fields and blah, 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 blah. You're going to draw a better picture than this, and you're going to indicate north as being not to scale and stuff like that. So that way you have a kind of a picture, so if you ever wanted to come out and say, okay, well, where was this all again? So don't forget to also draw that into your book as well. And that is your first surveying lab.